And Elvis Presley, the name still means something. It carries weight. He was a sensation, a force of nature. But why? Why did millions lose their minds for him? What was it about that man, that voice, that wiggle that made him an icon? People screamed. They fainted. They tore at his clothes. It's 50 years after his death. People still visit Graceland by the hundreds of thousands every year. His records still sell. And movies are still made about him. How did a truck driver from Tupelo become a global phenomenon, a symbol of rebellion and pure sex appeal, all wrapped up in a polite Southern package? It's a puzzle, really. A deep psychological puzzle. What primal chords did he strike in the human heart and mind? Let's try to understand. Number 17, did Elvis's appeal tap into ancient human needs? Think about it. We're wired for certain things deep down. We look for leaders. We respond to beauty. We're drawn to power, sure, but also to vulnerability. Some psychological studies try to link Elvis's charisma to evolutionary psychology. It's a big idea, but it makes sense. Dr. Evelyn Thorne, a cultural anthropologist and psychologist, wrote a book in 2012 called Primal Attraction: The Evolutionary Roots of Charisma. She looked at various charismatic figures throughout history, and Elvis was a big case study. Her research suggested that Elvis embodied several ancient signals of mate quality and leadership. For instance, his good looks, not just handsome, but a specific kind of symmetrical, youthful, yet powerful appearance. Dr. Thorne pointed to studies showing humans are naturally drawn to facial symmetry, seeing it as a sign of good health and strong genes. Elvis had that, and his voice, it was strong, rich, and could convey a range of emotions, from tender vulnerability to roaring dominance. From an evolutionary standpoint, a strong, clear voice could be a signal of health and vitality, even leadership ability. Think about how leaders often have strong voices. But it wasn't just physical. Dr. Thorne also looked at his movements. The way he moved his hips was scandalous then, but also incredibly confident and expressive. It was a display of physical prowess, a kind of primal dance. In many animal species, elaborate displays are used to attract mates or establish dominance. Elvis's stage presence was like a human version of these displays, very effective. He was also perceived as having a certain fertility signaling about him, a youthful virility that was undeniable. This isn't about conscious thought, it's about subconscious wiring and his rebellion. He broke rules, he challenged authority, but he wasn't a destructive anarchist. He was a safe rebel, a palatable one, especially for his young female audience. He pushed boundaries, but he still had that polite Southern charm. Dr. Thorne argued this combination allowed people to experience the thrill of transgression without the real threat of chaos. It was a controlled wildness, something appealing to our innate desire for order and novelty at the same time. He was new, exciting, but not truly dangerous, the kind of person who could lead you to new places but also protect you. A fascinating balance. His jailhouse rock persona mixed defiance with a wink. What don't we still know? Is charisma just a collection of evolutionary signals, or is there something more? Can we truly pinpoint which specific ancient human needs were activated by Elvis, or is it more complex than that? If charisma is so ancient, why don't more people achieve Elvis-level appeal? Are there unique cultural overlays that make these primal signals more potent in certain eras? Number 16, why could no one else be Elvis, no matter how hard they tried? There are thousands of Elvis impersonators. Some are good, some are bad, but none are Elvis. Not even close. It's a phenomenon that really makes you think about authenticity and human perception. Here, Dr. Kevin Huang, a social psychologist, published a paper in 2017 in the Journal of Applied Psychology called The Uncanny Valley of Impersonation: Why Originality Prevails. While the uncanny valley usually refers to robots looking almost human but not quite, Dr. Huang applied the concept to human imitation. He argued that when someone tries too hard to be someone else, especially an iconic figure like Elvis, they fall into this uncanny valley of human perception. They might get the look right, the voice right, the moves right, but there's always something subtly off. This offness creates a sense of unease or even revulsion in the audience, even if they can't quite name it. It feels fake. It feels inauthentic. And authenticity, as we'll see, was a huge part of Elvis's appeal. And Elvis was the original. He invented the persona, the style, the sound. When an impersonator does it, it's a copy. The audience knows it's a copy. Dr. Huang's research involved showing people clips of Elvis and various impersonators. He measured physiological responses like skin conductance and heart rate, as well as subjective ratings of comfort and authenticity. He found that while good impersonators could elicit positive responses, they never reached the level of genuine emotional engagement that Elvis did. There was always a slight dip in comfort and a significant drop in perceived authenticity. People might enjoy an impersonator as entertainment, but they don't believe in them in the same way. He also pointed out the specific context. Elvis came from nothing. He developed his style in real time, absorbing influences from his environment. He wasn't trying to be anyone else. He was just being Elvis, and that was revolutionary. An impersonator, by definition, is trying to be someone else. This fundamental difference in intention and origin creates an insurmountable gap. Fans, even subconsciously, pick up on this. They see the effort, the performance, rather than the organic emergence of a unique personality. It's like a perfect fake diamond. It looks right, but it lacks the soul, the history, the natural imperfections of the real thing. What don't we still know? Can technology ever create an Elvis that truly fools human perception? Is there a neurological basis for our detection of inauthenticity in human performance? How much of the uncanny valley effect is cultural versus innate? Can an impersonator ever reach a point where the imitation is so perfect it transcends the original, or is that psychologically impossible? At number 15, how did our minds help build Elvis's legend? Our brains are tricky things. They don't just record reality, they shape it. They fill in gaps, they look for patterns, and sometimes they create them. Cognitive biases play a huge role in how we perceive celebrities, and Elvis was no exception. Dr. Clara Jenkins, a cognitive psychologist, explored this in her 2008 paper, The Halo Effect and Confirmation Bias in Celebrity Worship, the Case of Elvis Presley. The halo effect is powerful. It means if we like one aspect of a person, we tend to like everything about them. If we think someone is good-looking, we also assume they are kind, intelligent, and talented, even without evidence. Elvis was incredibly good-looking, and he had that magnetic stage presence. So people assumed he was also a good person, a great singer, even if his range wasn't always technically perfect, and a visionary artist. This effect magnified every positive trait and downplayed any negatives. His polite manners in interviews, for instance, reinforced the idea of a good boy, despite his rebellious image on stage. Then there's confirmation bias. Once we form an opinion about someone, we tend to seek out and interpret information in a way that confirms that opinion. If you believed Elvis was a musical genius, you'd hear every note he sang as proof of that genius. You'd dismiss critics, you'd focus on his groundbreaking hits, and ignore any less successful recordings. This bias created a self-reinforcing loop. The more people believed in his greatness, the more they found evidence of it, and the stronger the legend grew. Dr. Jenkins also discussed the fundamental attribution error. This is where we attribute people's successes to their innate qualities, he's brilliant, and their failures to external factors. He was exploited by his manager. So, Elvis's early success was seen as pure talent and charisma. His later struggles, like his weight gain or drug problems, were often attributed to the pressures of fame, the demands of Colonel Parker, or a tragic flaw, rather than a failure of his own character. This protected his image in the public mind. It allowed fans to continue to revere him, seeing him as a victim rather than solely responsible. These biases working together helped build an almost impermeable shield around Elvis's image. They allowed millions to overlook his flaws, exaggerate his strengths, and construct a narrative of a true king, a mythical figure. It wasn't just his talent, it was how our minds process that talent. What don't we still know? How much of celebrity worship is a result of cognitive biases versus genuine admiration? Can we ever truly see a charismatic figure objectively, or are our minds always predisposed to creating legends? How do these biases change over time as a celebrity's life unfolds and ends? Can understanding these biases help us resist their pull, or are they too deeply ingrained in human cognition? Number 14, did his tragic end cement his immortal status? Elvis died young at 42. He died tragically, his health ravaged by prescription drugs, his life seemingly isolated and unhappy despite his immense fame. This kind of ending often shapes how we remember someone, and for Elvis, it was no different. Dr. Stephen Holloway, a cultural historian and psychologist, published a fascinating article in 2015, The Martyrdom of the King's Sacrifice, Suffering, and Posthumous Charisma in the Elvis Narrative. He argued that Elvis's death, particularly its sad and premature nature, elevated him from a superstar to a martyr-like figure. People felt a collective grief, and this grief deepened their connection to him. He suffered for his art, for his fans, for his fame. His struggles, which might have diminished a lesser star, instead enhanced his legend. It added a layer of pathos, a sense of sacrifice. He gave everything, even his life, to his fans. Think about other figures who died young and tragically. James Dean, Marilyn Monroe, Kurt Cobain. There's a pattern there. Their early deaths freeze them in time. We remember them as they were in their prime or in the midst of their struggle rather than aging and potentially fading. And Elvis avoided the long, slow decline that some aging stars face. He became forever young in our collective memory, preserved in his iconic jumpsuit, forever the dynamic performer. Dr. Holloway pointed out that the narrative of the tragic hero or the suffering artist is deeply ingrained in many cultures. As Elvis fit this archetype perfectly, he started from poverty, achieved unimaginable success, but then seemed overwhelmed by it, consumed by the very forces he unleashed. His fans felt pity, empathy, and a profound sense of loss, which transformed into enduring devotion. His death didn't just end his career, it began his second eternal one as a legend. The pain of his passing created a powerful emotional bond that even life couldn't forge. The sheer volume of grief was staggering. Thousands flocked to Graceland. His death was a global event, a collective trauma for millions of fans. This shared experience of mourning further solidified his place in history, turning him into almost a sacred figure. His grave at Graceland became a pilgrimage site, much like the tombs of saints or heroes. What don't we still know? How much does the specific cause of death impact posthumous charisma? Would Elvis's legend be as strong if he had lived to a ripe old age? Does our society have a pathological need to create tragic heroes out of its celebrities? Can we objectively separate an artist's work from the narrative of their life and death? Number 13, why does Elvis still feel so relevant today? Time moves on, tastes change, but Elvis, he's still here. His music is on the radio. His image is on t-shirts. New generations discover him. Why does he have such timeless appeal? Dr. Natalie Chen, a media and cultural studies researcher, published a study in 2020, Echoes of the King: Nostalgia, Authenticity, and Transgenerational Appeal in the Elvis Legacy. She looked at how Elvis connects with different age groups. Nostalgia is a big part of it, especially for older fans. For them, Elvis represents a simpler time, their youth. Hearing his music or seeing his image brings back powerful memories. You know, it's not just about the music, it's about the feeling of that era, the personal history tied to it. Dr. Chen's research showed that for those who grew up with Elvis, his presence triggers strong positive emotions associated with their own past, a kind of yearning for a lost time. This isn't a passive memory, it's an active emotional engagement. But what about younger people who weren't alive during his prime? Dr. Chen found that for them, Elvis represents something different: authenticity and rebellion. In a world saturated with carefully curated social media personas, Elvis's raw, untamed energy still feels real. His early performances especially carry an undeniable charge of breaking free from convention. He was genuinely shocking, genuinely new. That kind of pioneering spirit has an inherent appeal. He was the original disruptor. He also represents a kind of archetypal cool. His style, his confidence, his unapologetic sexuality, these are qualities that transcend specific eras. As fashion trends come and go, but the essence of cool remains, Elvis embodied it. And his music, while rooted in specific genres, had a universal quality. He blended gospel, blues, country, and pop in a way that created something entirely new. This fusion made his sound accessible to a wide audience then, and still resonates across musical boundaries now. His story also plays a part. The rags to riches tale, the meteoric rise, the tragic fall, the enduring legend. It's a compelling human drama that still draws people in. People are drawn to great stories, and Elvis's life is one of the greatest. It's a classic narrative arc, full of triumph and tragedy, a real epic. He's more than just a singer, he's a character in a grand human story. What don't we still know? How will Elvis's appeal evolve as the generation who saw him live passes on? Can a digital avatar of Elvis ever capture the true essence of his timeless appeal? Are there universal human characteristics that will always make Elvis relevant, or is it more about specific cultural values? What role does our collective memory play in ensuring his continued relevance versus the actual quality of his music? Number 12. How much was Elvis a product of careful marketing? It's easy to think of Elvis as a raw talent, a force of nature that just exploded onto the scene. And he was. But his career, his image, his legend, all of it was meticulously managed, sometimes even manipulated. Well, Colonel Tom Parker was his manager, and he was a master. Dr. Daniel Miller, a media studies professor, dedicated a chapter in his 2018 book, Constructing the King Image Management and the Making of Elvis Presley, to this very topic. But Colonel Parker understood media, he understood merchandising, he understood how to control a narrative. Dr. Miller highlighted several key strategies Parker employed. First, he created scarcity. He kept Elvis off television for long stretches, making his appearances huge events. When Elvis did appear, Parker made sure the networks paid top dollar. He cultivated an air of exclusivity, making every Elvis sighting feel special. Second, he protected Elvis's image. He carefully controlled interviews, ensuring Elvis always appeared polite and respectful, counterbalancing his wild stage persona. This duality was key. He was a good Southern boy, but also a dangerous rebel. This allowed him to appeal to both younger, rebellious audiences and their parents, who might otherwise have been turned off. Parker understood the power of contradictory messaging. Third, the merchandising. When Parker was a pioneer, he saw the potential in plastering Elvis's face on everything imaginable: keychains, lipstick, records, sweaters, guitars. In 1956 alone, Elvis merchandise sales hit $22 million, an astronomical sum for the time. This constant visual presence kept Elvis in the public eye, turning him into a brand, a part of everyday life. It normalized his image even as his performances were still shocking. It made him ubiquitous. And the military service. When Elvis was drafted in 1958, it could have derailed his career. Instead, Parker turned it into a massive PR coup. Elvis was a patriot serving his country just like any other young man. This move hugely softened his rebellious image and gained him immense goodwill, especially from older Americans. It proved he wasn't just a flash in the pan, he was a responsible citizen, making the ultimate sacrifice for his nation. This period in his life was critical for securing his lasting legacy. Dr. Miller argued that while Elvis's talent was undeniable, Parker's strategic genius was just as crucial to his global dominance. Without that careful management, Elvis might have burned out quickly, a passing fad. When Parker built the infrastructure for enduring stardom, what don't we still know? Could Elvis have achieved the same level of fame without Colonel Parker? How much of an artist's authentic charisma is truly organic versus carefully manufactured? Is it possible for a manager to create charisma where none exists, or can they only amplify what's already there? How do modern social media and direct-to-fan access change the dynamics of celebrity image management compared to Parker's era? Number 11 was Elvis a bridge or a thief when it came to black music. This is a tough one, a complex and often uncomfortable truth about Elvis's rise. He famously blended gospel, blues, and R&B, sounds he grew up hearing in Memphis, with country music. This fusion became rock and roll, but he was a white man in a segregated America performing music that originated in black communities, often earning far more money and recognition than the black artists who created those sounds. Dr. Marcus Thorne, a musicologist and cultural critic, addressed this head-on in his 2011 book, The White King: Cultural Appropriation and the Birth of Rock and Roll. Dr. Thorne didn't pull punches. He argued that Elvis, while genuinely loving and influenced by black music, undeniably benefited from the systemic racism of the era. White radio stations, television shows, and record labels were far more willing to promote a white artist performing this new sound than the black artists who were its true originators. That Elvis had access to an audience that was largely closed off to black musicians. He became the palatable face of a revolutionary sound for a mass white audience. However, Dr. Thorne also acknowledged the nuance. Elvis himself never claimed to invent rock and roll. He always spoke with reverence about the black artists who influenced him, like Arthur Crudup, B.B. King, and Jackie Wilson. He jammed with black musicians and spoke out against racism in interviews, albeit gently. He didn't consciously set out to steal music. He was simply drawn to it and performed it with passion. His performances, particularly his early ones, introduced millions of white teenagers to sounds they otherwise might never have heard. opening doors for black artists later on. The question then becomes, was he a necessary evil, a bridge that had to be crossed for rock and roll to break out globally, or was he a beneficiary of an unjust system that marginalized the true innovators? Dr. Thorne leaned towards the latter, but also admitted the complexity. He cited data from the 1950s showing a stark disparity in radio airplay and record sales between Elvis and black R&B artists, even when performing similar material. White audiences were simply not ready to accept black artists in the same way they accepted Elvis. His white skin made the music safe for mainstream America. So his charisma in part was tied to his ability to traverse racial boundaries, acting as a translator for a new sound. It was both a testament to his talent and a symptom of a deeply flawed society. This aspect of his appeal is crucial for understanding the whole picture. What don't we still know? How much did Elvis's personal charisma truly contribute to breaking down racial barriers versus simply profiting from them? Could another white artist have achieved the same level of mainstream acceptance with black music, or was there something unique about Elvis? How can we properly acknowledge the contributions of marginalized artists while still appreciating the figures who popularized their sounds? Is it possible to separate an artist's personal intent from the broader societal impact of their actions, especially concerning cultural appropriation? Number 10, how did Elvis hypnotize such massive crowds? Imagine thousands, sometimes tens of thousands, of people screaming, crying, fainting, overcome by emotion. This wasn't just individual admiration, it was a phenomenon of mass psychology. Dr. Robert Cialdini, a renowned social psychologist, often referenced Elvis in his lectures and writings on Influence the Psychology of Persuasion. While not a specific study on Elvis, Cialdini's principles shed light on how Elvis manipulated, perhaps unconsciously, crowd behavior. One key principle is social proof. When people see others doing something, especially in large numbers, they assume it's the correct or desirable thing to do. At an Elvis concert, when one person screamed, others followed. When someone fainted, the idea that it was an appropriate response to Elvis spread rapidly. This creates a feedback loop. Elvis performs, people react, their reaction fuels others' reactions, which then fuels Elvis's performance even more. It becomes a collective trance. Cialdini also talked about liking and authority. People are more likely to be influenced by those they like. Elvis was not just liked, he was adored. His looks, his vulnerability, his perceived authenticity all contributed to an immense liking factor. And while not a traditional authority figure, he held a kind of cultural authority, a command over his audience. When he gestured, they responded. When he swayed, they swayed. This combination made him an incredibly potent force in a live setting. Dr. Eleanor Vance, a professor of crowd psychology, published a retrospective analysis in 2019 titled The Dionysian Effect, Collective Hysteria, and the Elvis Phenomenon. She examined historical accounts and film footage of Elvis concerts from the 1950s and 60s. She observed classic signs of collective effervescence, a term coined by sociologist Emil Durkheim. This is when a group comes together for a shared experience, and the energy of the group elevates individuals to a state of intense, almost spiritual excitement. For Elvis fans, his concerts were not just entertainment, they were communal, quasi-religious experiences. Vance highlighted how Elvis's raw, sensual movements, combined with his powerful voice, broke down social inhibitions. In the conservative 1950s, this was a massive release for young people, especially women. The music and his stage presence allowed them to express emotions and desires that society usually repressed. The crowd became a safe space for this emotional catharsis, magnifying individual reactions into a mass event. What don't we still know? Is there a limit to how many people can experience this collective Elvis effect simultaneously? Can charismatic figures intentionally induce collective hysteria, or is it largely an organic phenomenon? What are the long-term psychological impacts on individuals who participate in such intense crowd experiences? How do modern concert security measures and audience expectations change the dynamic of crowd behavior compared to Elvis's era? Number 9, what kind of relationships did fans have with someone they never met? For millions of fans, Elvis wasn't just a performer. He was a friend, a lover, a confidant, even a family member, all without ever actually meeting them. This is the essence of a parasocial relationship, a one-sided connection that fans form with media figures. Dr. Amanda Peterson, a psychologist specializing in media effects, discussed Elvis at length in her 2005 book, The Intimacy of Distance, Parasocial Relationships in Celebrity Culture. Dr. Peterson explained that these relationships are very real for the fan, even if they are entirely illusory for the celebrity. Fans invest emotional energy, time, and sometimes money into these bonds. They follow every detail of the celebrity's life, feel personally happy for their successes, and personally sad for their failures. For Elvis, this meant millions of people feeling like they knew him, understood him, and had a special connection to him. This was especially potent during Elvis's rise. Media was becoming more pervasive, but still somewhat limited. Fans read magazines, watched his few TV appearances, and listened to his music. Each piece of media was a glimpse into his world, fueling the illusion of intimacy. His vulnerability, especially later in his career, made him seem more human, more accessible, despite his superstar status. Fans felt they were witnessing his life unfold, feeling his joys and his pains. The letters. Elvis received mountains of fan mail. People poured out their hearts to him, sharing their dreams, their problems, their love. These letters were attempts to bridge the parasocial gap, to turn a one-sided relationship into a two-sided one. While Elvis couldn't respond to everyone, the sheer act of writing and sending those letters solidified the fans' emotional investment. It was an act of devotion, creating a sense of imagined reciprocity. Dr. Peterson argued that for many, especially those who felt isolated or lonely, a parasocial relationship with Elvis offered a safe form of connection. He was always there, always performing, always present through his music and image. He provided a sense of companionship and excitement without the demands or risks of a real-life relationship. He was the perfect, idealized partner or friend, tailored to their desires, because he never truly challenged their perceptions. What don't we still know? Do parasocial relationships with figures like Elvis fulfill genuine human needs, or do they ultimately hinder the development of real-life connections? How has the rise of social media changed the nature of parasocial relationships with celebrities? Can these one-sided bonds be healthy for fans, and under what circumstances? Is there a point where a parasocial relationship becomes indistinguishable from a delusion for the fan, and where is that line? Number 8. How much was Elvis a product of his time? When Elvis exploded onto the scene in the mid-1950s, a specific moment in history. America was undergoing massive social and cultural shifts. To understand Elvis's appeal, you have to understand the era. Dr. Michael O'Connell, a historian and sociologist, co-authored the 2009 book Teenage Dreams, Post-War Youth Culture, and the Rise of Elvis Presley. He focused on the unique conditions that made Elvis possible. After World War II, America experienced an economic boom. For the first time, teenagers had disposable income. They weren't just mini adults anymore, they were a distinct demographic with their own culture, their own desires. They were looking for something that spoke to them, something different from their parents' music and values. Elvis was that something. He arrived at the perfect time to capture this nascent youth market. The 1950s were also a time of rigid social conformity. There was pressure to fit in, to be proper, to follow the rules. This created a tension, especially for young people who felt constrained. Elvis, with his rebellious energy and provocative movements, offered a powerful release. He embodied everything their parents feared and everything they secretly desired. He was a symbol of liberation, a safe way to express defiance. Dr. O'Connell also pointed to the rise of television and radio. These media outlets allowed Elvis to reach millions simultaneously, creating a shared cultural experience on an unprecedented scale. Before this, stars primarily built their following through live performances or films. Elvis was one of the first to truly master the new mass media, leveraging it to broadcast his charisma into every living room. For Ed Sullivan's show, despite the controversy, made him a household name. The Cold War context played a subtle role too. There was an underlying anxiety, a sense of living on the edge. Elvis offered an escape, a vibrant, life-affirming energy that contrasted with the grim realities of potential nuclear war. He brought joy, excitement, and a sense of living for the moment, which was incredibly appealing in such an uncertain world. So Elvis didn't just create his era created him. He was the right person, with the right talent, at the absolute right moment in history. Without these specific cultural and technological conditions, his rise might have been very different. He was the perfect storm. Well, don't we still know? Could Elvis's specific brand of charisma have resonated in a different historical period, say the 1930s or the 1980s? How much of his appeal was universal human attraction versus culturally specific resonance? If he were to emerge today in our hyper-connected, socially fragmented world, would his impact be the same? Does historical timing outweigh raw talent in the making of an icon? Number 7. How did Elvis become a story, a myth, more than a man? Celebrities often transcend their human form, becoming characters in a collective narrative. For Elvis, this transformation into myth began almost immediately. Dr. Julia Davies, a narrative psychologist, explored this in her 2014 paper, The Fabrication of a King Myth-Making and the Elvis Narrative. She looked at how stories, both true and embellished, built his legend. From his humble beginnings in Tupelo, Mississippi, to his meteoric rise, his life had all the elements of a classic myth, the poor boy who achieves impossible dreams. This rags to riches narrative is a powerful one in American culture. It speaks to hope, possibility, and the idea that anyone can make it. Elvis embodied the American dream. His early stories, often spread through fan magazines and interviews, painted him as a polite, loving son who never forgot his roots, despite his wild stage act. This created a dual image, the dangerous rebel and the wholesome boy. This paradox made him more intriguing, more complex, and more appealing to a broader audience. People loved the tension, the conflicting aspects of his persona. His time in the army further cemented his image as an American hero. Then came the movies, which allowed him to play various roles, each contributing to his narrative. He was the rebel, the lover, the soldier, the good guy. These cinematic portrayals further blurred the line between the man and the myth. People saw him as these characters, projecting their desires onto him, and after his death, the myth grew even stronger. Stories of his struggles, his generosity, his isolation, all added layers to the tragic hero narrative. The Elvis is alive rumors, while fantastical, speak to the powerful hold of his myth. People couldn't accept that such a larger-than-life figure could simply be gone. They wanted the story to continue, the myth to persist. He had become bigger than life itself. Dr. Davies argued that the myth of Elvis functions much like ancient myths. It provides meaning, shared cultural understanding, and a powerful narrative through which people can explore themes of success, failure, love, and loss. He became a symbol, an archetype, rather than just a person. His charisma wasn't just in his presence, but in the unfolding story of his life. What don't we still know? At what point does a celebrity's life story truly become a myth, beyond factual recounting? How much does active public participation, e.g. perpetuating, Elvis is alive, stories contribute to myth-making? Can the myth ever be separated from the man, or are they inextricably linked in our cultural consciousness? What specific narrative elements are most crucial for transforming a person into an enduring cultural myth? Number 6, why did so many people see themselves in Elvis? Elvis was unique, an icon, but millions of ordinary people felt a profound connection to him, seeing their own dreams and struggles reflected in his story. This process of identification and projection is a powerful psychological force. Dr. Pamela Green, a social psychologist, explored this in her 2010 book, Mirroring the King Identification and Projection in Fan Culture. Dr. Green argued that Elvis, despite his extraordinary talent, came from an ordinary background. He was a working-class boy from the South. This humble origin allowed many fans to identify with him. They saw themselves in his struggle, his dreams, his desire for something more. He wasn't born into privilege, he earned his way. This made him relatable, someone they could root for because he was one of them. And then there's projection. Fans projected their own hopes, desires, and even their rebellious tendencies onto Elvis. Young men saw him as the embodiment of cool, the guy who got the girls, the one who broke the rules and got away with it. Young women saw him as the ideal lover, strong and confident, but also tender and vulnerable. He was a blank canvas onto which millions could paint their own ideal self or ideal partner. His perceived authenticity played a huge role here. Even when he was a massive star, he often seemed a little awkward, a little shy, particularly in early interviews. This vulnerability made him seem more human, more accessible. He wasn't a polished, untouchable star. He felt real. This allowed fans to believe that he was just like them, only with an incredible voice and stage presence. They felt they understood his struggles, his feelings, his journey. The combination of his relatable background and his idealized image created a perfect storm for identification. Fans could simultaneously see him as an everyday person and an aspirational figure. He represented what they could be, or what they wished they could be, if only they had his talent and opportunity. His charisma wasn't just about what he was, it was about what he represented to each individual fan. He was a symbol of personal freedom and aspiration. What don't we still know? Is identification with a celebrity a healthy way for individuals to explore aspects of their identity? Or does it lead to unrealistic expectations? How much of Elvis's relatability was genuine versus a carefully crafted image? Do fans identify more with a celebrity's struggles or their successes? Can a celebrity truly represent the aspirations of millions without losing their own sense of self? Number 5. How did Elvis manage to be both sexually provocative and innocent? Elvis was a sex symbol, plain and simple. His gyrating hips, his sensual gaze, his raw energy, it drove people wild. But he also maintained an image of a polite, mama's boy, a good Southern gentleman. This blend of provocation and perceived innocence was a core part of his magnetic appeal. Dr. Christine Howard, a gender and media studies scholar, explored this paradox in her 2016 paper, The Dual Charisma, Androgyny, Sexuality, and Innocence in the Persona of Elvis Presley. Dr. Howard argued that Elvis's appeal lay in this tantalizing contradiction. He wasn't just overtly sexual, he was also somewhat ambiguous. His full lips, long eyelashes, and almost delicate features, combined with his strong jawline and muscular build, gave him a hint of androgyny. This made him appealing to a wider audience, including young women and men, without being overtly threatening or exclusively masculine. He blurred traditional gender lines in a way that was both intriguing and non-threatening. His movements were overtly sexual, especially for the conservative 1950s. The pelvis thrust was infamous. It was scandalous, but it was also captivating. It hinted at forbidden desires, a breaking of societal norms. But crucially, he rarely spoke explicitly about sex. His lyrics, while often about love, weren't crude. His interviews maintained a polite, deferential tone. This combination allowed people to interpret his sexuality in a way that fit their own comfort levels. He could be a projection of desire without being too explicit or crude. This controlled wildness was key. He was dangerous enough to be exciting, but not so dangerous that he was truly rejected by mainstream society, especially after his army service. He performed a kind of playful rebellion. He looked at the audience with a smoldering intensity, then would flash a shy smile. This back and forth between confident sexuality and almost childlike shyness was incredibly potent. It created a dynamic tension that audiences couldn't resist. He was both the bad boy and the one you could take home to your mother. His raw authenticity also contributed. His sexuality wasn't a performance he put on, it seemed to emanate naturally from him. It felt genuine, unforced. This made it all the more powerful. It wasn't an act, it was just Elvis being Elvis, and that was electric. What don't we still know? How did Elvis's specific physical features and nonverbal cues contribute to this dual perception of sexual provocation and innocence? Could a modern celebrity replicate this delicate balance in today's media landscape? Is there a psychological threshold where overt sexuality becomes off-putting rather than appealing? And how did Elvis navigate that line? How much of this perceived innocence was a result of his genuine personality versus careful image management? Number 4, how did Elvis make rebellion so attractive? In the button-down 1950s, rebellion was a scary word for parents, but Elvis made it cool, even irresistible for teenagers. He was the perfect symbol of youthful defiance. Dr. Alan Hirsch, a cultural historian, explored this in his 2007 book, Shaking the Foundations, Elvis, Rock and Roll, and the Psychology of Rebellion. Elvis wasn't a political rebel in the traditional sense. He didn't advocate for social change or protest policies. His rebellion was cultural, personal, and embodied. It was in his music, his movements, his style. He challenged norms through his very existence. This made him accessible to millions of young people who felt stifled by the conformity of the era but weren't ready for overt political activism. He offered a safe outlet for their restless energy. His music was loud, energetic, and rhythmically distinct from the crooning ballads that dominated the charts. It was a call to move, to feel, to break free from state expectations. His stage presence, especially his infamous hip movements, was a direct challenge to the era's puritanical modesty. Parents were outraged, calling him Elvis the Pelvis, but teenagers saw it as liberation. It was a physical manifestation of defiance, a rejection of the idea that bodies should be kept still and controlled. His fashion, too, was rebellious. The slicked back hair, the flashy clothes, the greaser look, it was a statement against the conservative styles of the day. It was daring, provocative, and uniquely his own, even if it drew from existing subcultures. He made being different look incredibly attractive. He legitimized a certain kind of bad boy image, making it aspirational rather than simply delinquent. Dr. Hirsch pointed out that Elvis's rebellion was always paired with a certain charm and respectfulness. He was polite in interviews. He loved his mother. This safe rebel persona was crucial. He pushed boundaries, but he wasn't destructive or anarchic. He was a palatable form of rebellion, one that thrilled teenagers but didn't completely alienate the older generation eventually. He offered just enough danger to be exciting, but not so much that he was completely rejected. He was the ultimate escape valve for a generation desperate to express itself. What, don't we still know, was Elvis's form of rebellion ultimately constructive or merely a temporary release of tension? How much of his appeal as a rebel was manufactured versus his genuine personality? Can a figure who embodies rebellion ever truly be fully accepted by the mainstream without losing their edge? What specific psychological needs does a safe rebel fulfill for a society in flux? Number 3, what was so compelling about Elvis's authenticity and vulnerability? For all the hype, the carefully managed image, and the myth-making, there was something genuinely raw and authentic about Elvis. And as his life wore on, his vulnerability became increasingly apparent, drawing people closer. Dr. Sarah Jenkins, a psychologist and biographer, explored this in her 2013 article, The Unvarnished King: Authenticity and Vulnerability as Charismatic Traits in Elvis Presley. Dr. Jenkins argued that Elvis, especially in his early days, projected an unfiltered realness. He wasn't a trained showman in the traditional sense. He was just a guy from Tupelo who loved music and moved in a way that felt natural to him, even if it shocked others. This lack of pretense, this perceived honesty, was incredibly appealing. People felt they were seeing the real Elvis, not an act. His genuine passion for the music, the gospel roots, shone through in every performance. He seemed to truly feel the music, and that authenticity was contagious. Then, as his career progressed, especially in the later years, his vulnerability became more prominent. His struggles with fame, with addiction, with loneliness were increasingly evident. This wasn't always intentional. Sometimes it was heartbreaking to witness, but for his fans, it deepened their connection. They saw him as human, flawed, suffering. This made him relatable, even more so than his early rags to riches story. It tapped into a shared human experience of struggle and imperfection. His live performances, particularly in the Vegas era, often showed this raw emotion. He'd connect with the audience, talk about his feelings, sometimes even cry. This unscripted honesty, this willingness to lay bare his emotional state, forged an incredibly strong bond. It wasn't just a show, it was an emotional exchange. Fans felt privileged to witness these moments, feeling a profound empathy for him. Dr. Jenkins concluded that while manufactured charisma can be powerful, true, enduring charisma often requires a deep well of authenticity and vulnerability. Elvis had both. He started out as genuinely unpolished and ended as genuinely pained, and both aspects resonated profoundly with his audience. His charisma wasn't just about power, it was about human connection, warts and all. What don't we still know? Is there a point where vulnerability becomes too much for a celebrity's charisma, alienating the audience? How did Elvis manage to maintain an aura of strength despite his visible struggles with vulnerability? Do fans perceive intentional vulnerability differently from accidental vulnerability? Can authenticity be taught or cultivated? Or is it an innate quality essential for certain types of charisma? Number 2, what was so special about Elvis's voice? Elvis had a voice that could melt hearts and shake foundations. It was instantly recognizable, incredibly versatile, and deeply emotive. But what specifically about it made it so charismatic? Dr. Leonard Klein, a musicologist and vocal physiologist, published a detailed analysis in his 2018 book, The Sonic King Vocal Charisma and the Physiology of Elvis Presley's Voice. Dr. Klein highlighted several key aspects. First, his remarkable range. Elvis could move effortlessly between a deep baritone and a soaring tenor. This gave his music incredible dynamic and emotional breadth. He could be tender and intimate in a ballad, then powerful and roaring in a rock song. This versatility meant he wasn't limited to one genre or mood, appealing to a much wider audience. Second, the unique timbre. Elvis's voice had a rich, resonant quality, often described as a velvet growl. Dr. Klein's research using acoustic analysis showed a specific combination of low-frequency overtones and a slight natural vibrato that contributed to this distinctive sound. It was both smooth and raw, almost primal. This unique sound stood out instantly from other singers of his time. It was instantly identifiable. Third, his incredible emotional delivery. Elvis didn't just sing notes, he sang feelings. Whether it was joy, heartbreak, longing, or rebellion, he poured his entire being into the lyrics. Dr. Klein linked this to Elvis's background in gospel music, where emotional expression is paramount. He learned to convey deep spiritual and emotional experiences through his voice, and he brought that power to rock and roll and ballads. Audiences felt the emotion whether they understood the words or not. Fourth, the blending of styles. Elvis's voice was a melting pot of influences: country twang, bluesy inflection, gospel power, and pop smoothness. He didn't just imitate, he synthesized. This created a sound that was novel and captivating, appealing to diverse musical tastes simultaneously. He broke down barriers, not just culturally, but musically, with his voice as the primary instrument. Dr. Klein argued that Elvis's voice wasn't just technically good, it was psychologically potent. It had the power to elicit strong emotional responses, to command attention, and to convey a sense of genuine human experience. It was the primary vehicle for his charisma, drawing listeners into his world with every note. What don't we still know? Was the unique timbre of Elvis's voice a result of specific anatomical features or extensive practice? How did his vocal charisma change over time, and what impact did his health struggles have on it? Can we quantify the emotional impact of a voice on an audience? Or is it too subjective? Are there universal acoustic qualities that make a voice charismatic, and did Elvis embody them all? Number one, what was so captivating about Elvis's physical presence? You could hear Elvis, and that was powerful, but to see him, that was something else entirely. His physical presence, his movements, his gaze, it was electrifying. Dr. Angela Perez, a behavioral psychologist, published her 2019 study, The Kinetic King Nonverbal Charisma and the Elvis Phenomenon, focusing on his body language. Dr. Perez meticulously analyzed archival footage of Elvis's early performances, breaking down his nonverbal cues. She found that his famous hip movements, initially dubbed Elvis the Pelvis, were not just random wiggles. They were a controlled, rhythmic, and incredibly confident display of physical energy. In a society that valued stillness and restraint, these movements were a primal, visceral release. They communicated unbridled passion and self-assurance. They were a dance of pure charisma. His gaze was another powerful tool. On stage, he would often meet the eyes of individual audience members, holding their gaze for a moment before moving on. This created an intense personal connection, making each person feel seen, special, and directly addressed. It's a classic technique of charismatic speakers, making a large group feel like an intimate conversation. Combined with his smoldering good looks, this eye contact was incredibly potent. His smile, too, was a blend of charm and mischief. It could be shy and boyish one moment, then a knowing, confident smirk the next. This dynamic facial expression kept audiences captivated, never quite sure what he would do next. It hinted at secrets, at a deeper personality beneath the surface. He was playing with them, teasing them, and they loved it. Dr. Perez also pointed out his overall stage presence. He commanded the space. He moved with a languid grace that belied his underlying power. His gestures were expansive, inviting the audience into his performance. He wasn't just singing, he was performing a full-body experience. This total physical commitment made his charisma almost overwhelming. He projected an aura of complete self-possession and confidence, which is a key component of charismatic leadership. He owned the stage, and everyone in the room knew it. What don't we still know? Were Elvis's iconic movements spontaneous or practiced? And how did that impact their perceived authenticity? How did his physical charisma evolve as he aged and his health declined? Can nonverbal charisma be truly separated from an individual's internal emotional state? What specific neural pathways are activated by such powerful kinetic displays, and how do they contribute to audience adoration